Cosmic overlords watched Earth, then panicked. Part 1. Senior Observer had been watching civilizations rise and fall for 12,000 years. In that time, he had seen hundreds of species take their first steps into space. Some burned themselves out in nuclear fire. Others destroyed their worlds through pollution or war. A few survived long enough to send primitive radio signals into the void before collapsing back into darkness. It was all very predictable. The consortium had ruled the Andromeda cluster for 47 million years. They were old beyond measure, wise beyond comparison, and utterly certain of their place in the cosmos. Their surveillance network stretched across 12 galaxies, watching, cataloging, and occasionally intervening when a species showed promise. They had seen it all. Nothing surprised them anymore. Until Earth. The planet itself was unremarkable. A small blue world circling an average yellow star in a quiet arm of the Milky Way galaxy. The initial survey had flagged it as marginal potential and filed it away with 10,000 other worlds. Wouldn't have looked at it twice if not for a routine check of the automated monitoring systems. The energy readings were wrong. He pulled up the historical data, his three-fingered hands moving across the holographic controls with practiced ease. 50 of their years ago, the planet had barely registered any electromagnetic emissions. Now it blazed with radio waves, microwave transmissions, and artificial light visible from orbit. That kind of acceleration was unusual but not unprecedented. What caught his attention was the timeline. The humans, as they called themselves, had gone from animal-powered transportation to orbital satellites in less than 200 of their years. That was fast. Concerning, even. Flagged the planet for detailed observation and returned to his other duties. 3 months later, he checked back. The humans had landed on their moon. They had done it using chemical rockets, controlled explosions, and what appeared to be slide rules and hand calculations. Felt the first stirring of unease. The level of risk tolerance required for such a venture was abnormally high. Most species waited until they had much safer technology before attempting such feats. He began watching more closely. Over the next several years, observed humanity with growing fascination and mounting concern. They were building space stations. They were sending probes to every planet in their solar system. They were smashing atoms together in massive underground rings, playing with energies they barely understood. They had split the atom and built weapons capable of destroying their entire civilization, yet somehow they hadn't used them. Not yet, anyway. But it was their culture that truly disturbed him. Spent weeks analyzing human entertainment broadcasts, literature, and communication networks. Every species that had ever studied created stories, but human stories were different. They were obsessed with overcoming impossible odds. Their heroes were often ordinary individuals who refused to give up, who won through stubbornness and ingenuity rather than superior strength. They celebrated the underdog, the rebel, the one who stood against overwhelming force and somehow prevailed. More troubling were their disaster scenarios. Humans created elaborate fictional stories about extinction events, alien invasions, zombie plagues, and cosmic catastrophes. And in these stories, humanity almost always survived. They showed themselves rebuilding after nuclear war, fighting off technologically superior aliens, and persisting through plague and disaster. It was as if they were mentally preparing themselves for the worst possible outcomes. Found records of a human saying, "Anything that doesn't kill us makes us stronger." Another culture had a phrase, "Fall down 7 times, get up 8." These weren't isolated expressions. This philosophy seemed to permeate their entire species. He pulled up biological data. Humans were persistence predators, evolved to chase prey over long distances until it collapsed from exhaustion. They had hunted megafauna into extinction on their own world by simply refusing to give up. Their ability to thermoregulate through sweating was nearly unique among Earth species. They could run for hours in heat that would kill most animals. They were built to never stop. Their neurology was equally concerning. The human brain released chemicals that rewarded risk-taking and problem-solving. They formed addictions not just to substances, but to challenges themselves. They voluntarily subjected themselves to extreme conditions, climbing mountains and diving into ocean depths, because it's there. They ran marathons for enjoyment. They jumped out of aircraft for fun. Filed his first priority report to the consortium's Warmind Council. It was flagged as speculative but concerning. He recommended continued observation. 2 more years passed. The humans sent more missions into space. They built a telescope that could see to the edge of the observable universe. They landed robots on other worlds and drove them around, studying rocks and soil like excited children examining a new toy. They created a network that connected their entire species, allowing them to share information instantaneously across their planet. Then noticed something that made his blood run cold. The humans had sent messages into space, deliberate, powerful broadcasts aimed at nearby star systems. The messages contained information about their planet's location, their biology, their mathematics, and their culture. They had announced themselves to the universe. Stared at the data in disbelief. What species did that? What sane civilization broadcast their location to potentially hostile aliens? It was cosmically stupid, a violation of the most basic survival instinct. Every other species that had reached this level of technology had hidden, staying quiet until they knew what else was out there. But humans had shouted into the darkness, hoping someone would answer. He pulled up more data, trying to understand. Human scientific institutions debated whether this was wise, but a significant portion of their population seemed excited by the prospect of alien contact. They made entertainment about friendly aliens, about trading with aliens, about forming alliances with aliens. The concept of a hostile first contact appeared in their fiction, but so did countless scenarios of peaceful cooperation. Humans, it seemed, were optimists. Dangerous, reckless optimists who assumed the universe would be friendly until proven otherwise. Filed an urgent report. This time, he included detailed projections. At their current rate of advancement, humans would develop crude faster-than-light travel within 200 years. They would discover the nearby consortium outposts within 300, and given their demonstrated tendency toward exploration and expansion, they would not stop at their own solar system. The Warmind Council, convened for the first time in 8,000 years, was summoned to present his findings in person, a rare honor that he did not particularly want. He stood before the council, 5 of the oldest and most powerful in existence, and explained what he had learned about humanity. They are aggressive, he said, showing images of human warfare. But not uniquely so. Many species fight among themselves. They are curious, he continued, displaying their space missions and scientific experiments. But curiosity alone is not dangerous. What makes them concerning, said carefully, is their combination of traits. They are persistent beyond reason. They are risk-tolerant beyond sanity. They form emotional bonds across species barriers. They have domesticated predators and prey animals and live with them as companions. They attempt the impossible as a matter of course. And they tell themselves stories where they always win. One of the council members, ancient beyond reckoning, spoke with a voice like grinding stone. You are concerned about their stories. I am concerned about what their stories tell us about their psychology, replied. They have a concept they call humanity, fuck yeah. It appears in their entertainment and communication networks. It is the idea that humans will prevail against any odds, defeat any enemy, overcome any obstacle through sheer determination and clever thinking. Primitive bravado, another council member dismissed. Perhaps, said, but they have earned some of that bravado. They have survived multiple extinction events on their own world. They have recovered from plagues that killed significant portions of their population. They have fought wars that should have destroyed them and emerged stronger. Their historical records show a pattern of responding to existential threats not with surrender or extinction, but with innovation and adaptation. The council was silent for a long moment. "What do you recommend?" the eldest asked. Chose his words carefully. "I recommend we send a stealth vessel to observe them more closely. We need to understand what we are dealing with. If they are truly as dangerous as I suspect, we need to know before they discover us." The council deliberated for 3 days. Finally, they issued their decision. A consortium stealth ship would be dispatched to the Sol system for close-range observation. The mission duration, 5 Earth years. The objective, determine if humanity represented a genuine threat to the consortium. Was assigned as the mission's senior. He accepted the duty with mixed feelings. Part of him was fascinated by these strange, reckless creatures. Part of him was terrified of what they might become. The stealth ship departed 6 months later, its hull wrapped in reality-bending fields that made it invisible to all known forms of detection. It would take 2 years to reach Earth's solar system using conventional travel. Spent the journey reviewing every scrap of data about humanity, trying to predict what they might find. One detail kept nagging at him. A human author had written a science fiction story decades ago about an alien invasion. In the story, the aliens were vastly superior in technology and nearly wiped out humanity. But the humans survived in small pockets, learned from captured alien technology, and eventually turned the tide through guerrilla warfare and adapted weapons. The story ended with humans pursuing the aliens back to their home world. It was fiction, reminded himself. Just a story. But he couldn't shake the feeling that it revealed something fundamental about human psychology. When faced with superior force, they didn't imagine noble surrender or peaceful coexistence. They imagined fighting back with stolen weapons and spite. The stealth ship entered Earth's solar system and took up position beyond the orbit of their outermost planet. From there, they could observe everything while remaining completely hidden. The real work was about to begin. Looked at the small blue planet on his screens and felt a chill run through his body. Somewhere down there, 8 billion humans were living their lives, completely unaware that they were being watched by beings millions of years older than their species. He just hoped the humans never found out, because he was increasingly certain that if they did, they wouldn't react with fear or submission. They would react with curiosity, excitement, and the terrifying question that seemed to define their species. What happens if we try? Part 2. The consortium stealth vessel hung in the darkness beyond Pluto's orbit, silent and invisible. Inside, and his team of 12 specialists began their detailed study of humanity. They had 5 Earth years to complete their assessment. Suspected they would reach a conclusion much sooner than that. The first month was spent establishing proper surveillance protocols. They deployed microprobes throughout the solar system, each one smaller than a grain of sand and absolutely undetectable by human technology. The probes settled into orbit around Earth, positioned themselves on the Moon, and embedded themselves in human satellites and space stations. Within weeks, the consortium had access to every digital communication on the planet, every broadcast, every computer system connected to their primitive internet. Dr. Ron, the teams, presented her initial findings on human physiology. What she reported made the entire crew uncomfortable. "They're more durable than they should be," she said, displaying a 3-dimensional model of human anatomy. "Their skeletal structure is reinforced beyond what's necessary for their gravity. Their immune system is aggressive to the point of self-harm. They have redundant organs. Their healing capacity is remarkable for a non-regenerative species." "Explain," requested. "They've evolved to survive trauma that would kill most species of similar size. Broken bones heal stronger than before. Skin seals itself. They can lose significant blood volume and recover. I found records of humans surviving falls from extreme heights, exposure to radiation that should be lethal, and injuries that would incapacitate most sapient species." She pulled up medical records, anonymized data the probes had collected from human databases. This individual was impaled through the torso by a metal rod. Survived. This one fell from an aircraft at high altitude. Survived. This one was buried under rubble for days without food or water. Survived. Outliers, suggested the cultural analyst. Every species has exceptional individuals. That's what I thought initially, Ron replied. But the statistical frequency of miraculous survivals in human records is far above what probability would suggest. I think their evolutionary history as persistence predators created a baseline durability that serves them well in crisis situations. They're built to take damage and keep going. Made notes. Continue your analysis. I want to understand their physical limits. Over the following weeks, the team compiled a comprehensive picture of human civilization. What they found was deeply unsettling. Documented human culture and found patterns that conventional models. Humans formed bonds not just with their own kind but across species. They kept predators in their homes as companions. They cried at the deaths of animals. They anthropomorphized everything from their vehicles to their planets to the stars themselves. This tendency toward empathy and connection extended even to their technology. They named their robots, their spacecraft, their artificial intelligence systems. They befriend things that aren't even alive, reported, clearly baffled. They form emotional attachments to machines. There are records of humans mourning the loss of robots they sent to other planets. They held memorials for defunct spacecraft. This could be advantageous, suggested one of the junior researchers. A species that forms bonds easily might be diplomatic. Or, countered, it means they will fight ferociously to protect those they've bonded with. An attack on one human's companion would be viewed as an attack on the human themselves. It creates an expanding circle of loyalty that's difficult to predict or contain. The team's computer systems analyst, L, made an even more disturbing discovery. He had been studying human artificial intelligence development and found something that violated every safety protocol the consortium had established over millions of years. They're teaching their computers to learn, he reported, his voice tight with concern. Not just to follow instructions, but to recognize patterns, make decisions, and improve themselves. They call it machine learning and artificial intelligence. That's prohibited, Ron said immediately. Self-improving artificial intelligence is a known extinction pathway. It's one of the first warnings we give emerging species. They don't know, L replied. They have no context for the danger, they're just doing it because they can, because it's interesting. Felt a familiar chill. Show me their safety protocols. L displayed the data. Human AI researchers had some safety measures in place, but they were primitive, incomplete, and inconsistent across different research groups. More troubling, a significant portion of the human population seemed excited about creating artificial general intelligence, viewing it as the next step in their evolution rather than an existential threat. They're having public debates about it, L continued. Some are concerned, yes, but many are enthusiastic. They write fiction about friendly AI, about merging with AI, about AI saving them from problems they can't solve themselves. They simultaneously fear and hope for it. Madness, Ron muttered. But it was the psychological profiles that truly frightened. Doctor, their neurologist and behavioral specialist, spent 3 months analyzing human psychology through their digital footprint, their entertainment, their historical records, and their brain chemistry. Her final presentation made the entire crew fall silent. Humans possess what I'm calling despite-based motivation, she explained. When told something is impossible, their instinct is not acceptance but defiance. Their neurochemistry rewards them for attempting difficult tasks. They experience satisfaction not just from success, but from the struggle itself. She showed brain scans. This is a human solving a puzzle. Notice the activation in the reward centers. Now watch what happens when the puzzle becomes more difficult. The activity increased rather than decreased. They enjoy challenges, continued. But more than that, they seem to need them. Their literature is filled with phrases like "hold my beer," which roughly translates to "watch me do this inadvisable thing." They have an entire category of entertainment called extreme sports, where they risk death for enjoyment. Suicidal tendencies, suggested. No, that's what makes this so strange. They're not trying to die. They're trying to feel alive. They seek the edge of danger because it makes them feel something. They climb mountains, dive into oceans, jump from cliffs with fabric wings, and voluntarily subject themselves to fear because it triggers their reward systems. Pulled up more data. Their fight-or-flight response is abnormal. Where most species have a strong flight component that encourages retreat from danger, humans have a third option that's equally weighted: fight. But they have something else too, something I don't have a good term for. It's fight or flight or negotiate or befriend or study. They can respond to threats in wildly unpredictable ways. She showed historical records. This is a human who found a dangerous predator in his dwelling. Instead of fleeing or killing it, he captured it and released it outside. This is a human who was attacked by a shark. After recovering, she went back into the ocean to study sharks. This is a human who climbed into an active volcano to take measurements. When asked why, he said, "Someone has to." The crew absorbed this in uncomfortable silence. "There's more," said quietly. "I've analyzed their response to existential threats throughout history. Plagues, famines, wars, natural disasters. The pattern is consistent. Humans respond to crisis not with despair but with innovation. When faced with a problem they can't overcome, they change the rules. They invent new technology. They adapt their behavior. They find loopholes in reality itself." Example asked. They couldn't breathe underwater, so they invented devices to carry air with them. They couldn't fly, so they built machines that could. They couldn't survive in space, so they built environments where they could. When they encountered diseases they couldn't cure, they invented vaccines and antibiotics. When they faced starvation, they engineered crops. When they needed more energy, they learned to split atoms. His voice dropped even lower. And all of this innovation and adaptation has occurred in the last few thousand years. They've been a technological species for less than 10,000 years. In evolutionary terms, they're infants, and they're already reaching for the stars. Knew what she was implying. They had taken millions of years to reach their current level of technology. Most species did. The fastest previous development the consortium had recorded was 30,000 years from agriculture to space travel. Humans were doing it in 10,000. At this rate, they would catch up to consortium technology in a cosmic. "What about their destructive capacity?" he asked. "Show me their weapons." The team's military analyst, K, took over the presentation. His report was equally disturbing. "They have nuclear weapons," he began. "Thousands of them, enough to destroy their own planet multiple times over. They built these weapons 70 years ago and somehow resisted using them in warfare." "That shows restraint," someone suggested hopefully. "No," Kay corrected. "It shows fear. They used them twice, saw the devastation, and were terrified enough to stop. But they didn't dismantle them. They kept them. And they've spent the decades since then making them more efficient, more powerful, more precise. The restraint isn't moral, it's practical." He showed images of human military technology. They have conventional weapons of remarkable sophistication. They've developed autonomous drones, precision-guided munitions, and cyber warfare capabilities. But what concerns me more is their tactical thinking. Kay displayed historical battles. Humans are strategic innovators. When faced with superior force, they don't simply surrender. They adapt. They use guerrilla tactics, asymmetric warfare, and psychological operations. They're willing to take casualties that would break most species' will to fight. During their second global war, some human populations fought to near extinction rather than surrender. Fanaticism, Ron commented. Sometimes, Kay agreed. But not always. Often it's calculation. They're willing to pay a high cost if they believe they can win eventually, and their definition of winning is flexible. Sometimes it means destroying the enemy. Sometimes it means outlasting them. Sometimes it means making victory so costly that the enemy gives up. He paused. I ran simulations. If we were to engage in direct military conflict with humanity at their current technology level, we would win. Obviously. But the casualty projections are unsettling. Humans would use every available resource, every weapon, every tactic. They would lose, but they would make us pay for it. And if they had access to our technology? Asked. Kay's expression darkened. Then the simulations become unpredictable. Humans are excellent at adapting captured technology. Their entire history shows this pattern. They steal, reverse engineer, and improve. If they got their hands on even one consortium ship, I believe they could figure it out within a generation. 2 at most. The meeting continued for hours, each specialist presenting their findings. The picture that emerged was of a species that was aggressive but not mindlessly so, curious but not foolishly so, resilient to the point of absurdity, and innovative in ways that violated every standard model of development. Compiled all the data into a comprehensive report. Before sending it to the Warmind Council, he added his own assessment. Humanity represents a potential threat not through superiority, but through unpredictability and persistence. They are a species that refuses to accept limits and responds to obstacles by going around, through, or over them. They have survived their own worst impulses and show no signs of self-limitation. Recommendation: continued observation and contingency planning. He sent the report and waited. The response came back within a week, which in consortium terms was almost instantaneous. The Warmind Council had reviewed his findings and reached a preliminary conclusion. They wanted more data. Specifically, they wanted to understand human social dynamics at the individual level. Assigned to the task: study their digital communications. I want to understand how they think, how they interact, what motivates them at the personal level. What found over the next several months painted a picture of a species that was simultaneously compassionate and cruel, rational and emotional, unified and fractured. They argue constantly, reported, about everything: politics, religion, philosophy, the best way to cook food. They form tribal groups and defend their positions aggressively. But here's what's strange: they can also change their minds. I've found countless examples of humans who held one belief strongly, encountered new information, and shifted their position completely. That shows flexibility, noted. Yes, but also danger. A species that can rapidly shift its collective thinking is unpredictable. Today they might be peaceful. Tomorrow they might decide we're a threat. Showed examples of human internet culture. They communicate through layers of irony, humor, and shared references. They create collaborative art and entertainment. They help strangers across the planet with problems. But they also engage in tribal warfare, harassment, and cruelty. Like most species, Ron observed. Yes and no, replied. Most species show these tendencies, but humans seem to toggle between extremes rapidly. One moment they're sending aid to disaster victims on the other side of their planet. The next, they're having vicious arguments about trivial matters. They contain multitudes. She pulled up one final piece of data. But this is what concerns me most. I found entire communities of humans dedicated to thinking about alien contact. They call themselves SETI researchers. They're actively searching for us. We know they sent those messages, someone said. It's not just that, continued. They're preparing. They have protocols for first contact. They debate what they should do if they meet aliens. And almost universally, their first instinct is curiosity. Not fear, not aggression, curiosity. They want to know what we're like, where we're from, what we know. They want to learn from us. That could be good, Ron suggested. Or it could be terrible, replied quietly. Because if they're curious about us, they'll look for us, and if they look hard enough, eventually they'll find us. He stared at the image of Earth on his screen, that small blue world teeming with 8 billion curious, persistent, adaptable, reckless humans. The species that looked at the impossible and said, "Watch this." The species that fell down and got back up. The species that made friends with predators and told stories where they always won. Increase surveillance, he ordered. I want to know everything, and start running long-term projection models. If humanity develops faster than light travel, what happens next? If they discover us, how do they react? If we reveal ourselves, what are the outcomes? The team got to work, but already suspected what the models would show. Humans weren't going to stay on their little blue planet. They were going to come out into the galaxy, and when they did, nothing would ever be the same. 3 months later, the models came back. Every single projection that involved humanity discovering the consortium ended the same way, with humans spreading across the galaxy like a wildfire, impossible to stop, impossible to predict, impossible to control. The age of this peaceful dominance was ending. The age of humanity was beginning. And the cosmic overlords, ancient and wise beyond measure, felt something they hadn't experienced in millions of years. Fear, Part 3, had been on Earth's moon, metaphorically speaking, for 2 years now. The stealth vessel remained in the outer solar system, but his attention had never left that blue planet. Every day brought new discoveries about humanity, and every discovery made the situation more complicated. The breaking point came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, Earth time. Burst into his observation chamber, her usually calm demeanor shattered. "You need to see this immediately." She pulled up a feed from one of their microprobes embedded in a human university. A young human scientist, barely into her 3rd decade of life, had published a paper proposing a new theoretical framework for faster-than-light travel. The paper itself wasn't revolutionary. Humans had been theorizing about FTL for decades. What made rush in was the response. Within hours, scientists around the globe were analyzing the paper. Within days, research institutions were dedicating resources to testing the hypothesis. Within weeks, a coalition of governments and private companies had announced funding for preliminary experiments. "They're not even sure it's possible," said, her voice tight. "But they're going to try anyway, because someone wrote a paper suggesting maybe it could work." Felt his stomach drop. The projections had estimated 200 years until humans developed FTL. This could cut that timeline in half, or more. He called an emergency meeting of the observation team. "We need to finalize our assessment," he told them. "The Warmind Council will want concrete recommendations, military scenarios, psychological profiles, biological assessment. I want everything compiled within 10 days. The team worked around the clock. What they produced was the most comprehensive analysis of an emerging species the consortium had ever created. It was also the most terrifying. K's war games showed that any direct military confrontation with humanity would be catastrophic, even if the consortium won. "They'll reverse engineer our technology," he warned. "Every battle we win gives them more data. Every ship we lose gives them more samples. Within a generation, they'll be matching us technologically. Within 2 generations, they might surpass us." "That's impossible," someone protested. "We've had 47 million years to develop our technology." "And they'll have our technology to study," K replied flatly. "They won't need to invent everything from scratch. They'll take what we have and improve it. That's what they do. Their entire technological history is built on iterative improvement and creative application of existing principles." Psychological assessment was equally grim. "We cannot predict how humans will react to contact. Their responses to new situations vary wildly based on cultural context, individual personality, and perceived threat level. They might greet us as friends. They might see us as invaders. They might try to study us. They might try to trade with us. All of these outcomes are possible, and we have no reliable way to determine which will occur. But we're vastly more advanced, someone argued. Surely they would recognize our superiority and defer to our authority. Would they? Challenged. Their history suggests otherwise. When humans encounter something more powerful than themselves, they don't automatically submit. Sometimes they fight. Sometimes they negotiate. Sometimes they learn and adapt until they match or exceed the power they faced. The concept of permanent submission to a superior force doesn't seem to exist in their psychology. Ron added her biological findings. Humans adapt quickly, both culturally and biologically. Their generation time is short. Their genetic diversity is high. Their capacity for learned behavior is exceptional. If we introduced new challenges, they would likely evolve solutions faster than we could predict. Listened to all of it and felt the weight of an impossible decision settling on his shoulders. Finally, he asked the question that mattered most. Can we control them? The room fell silent. No, Kay said finally. Not through military force. We could devastate their planet, but we couldn't occupy it. They're too numerous, too distributed, and too persistent. Any occupation force would face constant resistance. No, agreed. Not through psychological manipulation. They're too diverse, too unpredictable. What works on one human or one human culture might fail completely on another. No, Ron concluded. Not through biological means. Their medical technology is advancing rapidly. Any plague or genetic weapon we deployed might be cured or adapted to within years. Then what do we do? Someone asked desperately. Had been thinking about this question for 2 years. He had run thousands of scenarios. He had studied every aspect of human civilization, and he had reached a conclusion that went against every instinct, every protocol, every assumption the consortium had built over millions of years. We leave, he said quietly. The room erupted in protest. Leave, abandon an entire sector of space. Retreat from primitives. We're the consortium. We don't run from emerging species. Raised his hand for silence. Listen to me. We have 3 options. First, we could attempt to exterminate humanity before they become a threat, but our own projections show this would likely fail and would certainly unite them against us. Second, we could reveal ourselves and attempt peaceful contact, but we cannot predict or control their response, and there's a significant chance they would view us as obstacles to be overcome rather than superiors to be respected. Third, we can withdraw, establish a buffer zone, and prepare for the day when they inevitably discover us on their own terms. That's cowardice, someone spat. No, replied calmly, it's pragmatism. If we attack them, we create an enemy that will pursue us across the galaxy with single-minded determination. Humans don't forgive existential threats. They remember, they plan, they wait, and then they act. If we make first contact, we lose the strategic advantage of observation and preparation. They'll know where we are, what we have, what we fear. They'll study us just as we've studied them, and they'll find our weaknesses. He pulled up a star map. But if we withdraw and let them develop naturally, we gain time. Time to prepare. Time to study them further. Time to develop strategies for eventual contact that don't involve warfare or deception. When they finally reach the stars and find us, we can meet them as equals who chose to step aside rather than interfere. You're suggesting we cede territory to primitives. The protest came again. I'm suggesting we recognize reality, replied. Humanity is not like other species. They will not be controlled. They will not be contained. They will not be stopped. The only question is whether we want to be their enemies or not. He sent his final report to the Warmind Council. In it, he included every piece of data they had collected, every analysis, every projection. And he made his recommendation clear: total withdrawal from a 100-light-year radius around Earth, immediate deactivation of all navigation beacons in the region, rerouting of all trade routes, a complete information blackout that would ensure humanity developed in isolation until they were ready for contact. "We should fear them," he wrote in his conclusion. "Not because they are strong, but because they don't know how to quit. Not because they are numerous, but because they work together when threatened. Not because they are intelligent, but because they are creative. They are a species that looks at the word impossible and hears challenge accepted. They are a species that falls down 7 times and gets up 8. They are a species that makes friends with predators and tells stories where they always win. And most terrifyingly of all, they are a species that has actually earned their confidence through survival and adaptation." He waited for the response. It took 3 weeks, which in consortium terms was an eternity. The Warmind Council had debated, argued, run their own simulations, and consulted records going back millions of years. Finally, the message came through. The Council accepted his recommendation. The withdrawal would begin immediately. Felt a strange mixture of relief and regret. They were doing the right thing, he was certain, but it still felt like defeat. The consortium, masters of 12 galaxies, overlords of countless species, were retreating from a single planet of primitives who didn't even know they existed. The operation took 6 months. It was the largest coordinated movement in consortium history. Every probe, every beacon, every satellite, every automated station within 100 light-years of Earth was systematically shut down and retrieved or destroyed. Trade routes that had been in use for millions of